Oyo, 1906. The Palace of the Aláàfin. A British political officer has come to discuss about new roads. The administration is building them across the province, and it needs new laborers and chiefs who will deliver them. That, he reminds the Aláàfin, is now his responsibility. Aláàfin Lawani Amubiyaya is barely a year on the throne. His predecessor, Adeyemi I, the last Aláàfin of an independent Oyo, died the year before. Lawani inherited a throne that had already been fired upon. In the old days, he says, the Aláàfin collected tributes, commanded armies, performed rituals for the fertility of the land. Now, he recruits laborers for British roads. The officer shifts. You remain the traditional ruler, he offers. We merely advise. Your authority is intact. And the Aláàfin says the line that will define the colonial century in Yoruba land. Agbada ńlá lè bo ara, kò lè bo ìwà. Meaning, a large garment may cover the body, but it does not conceal the character underneath. Indirect rule kept the chiefs in place, the courts running, the rituals performed. The structure looked the same. The purpose had fundamentally changed. Today, the season finale, we open the robe. Welcome to the season finale of Yoruba History, Identity, and the In-Between. I'm Dr. Zakshitu. In systems architecture, there's a pattern called the facade. Keep the familiar interface intact. Quietly replace everything underneath. Users see what they expect to see. The transformation is total. Indirect rule was the colonial application of exactly this pattern. And this episode closes the arc 6 episodes have been building. If this season has built something with you, subscribe before we begin. Season 2 picks up exactly where this leaves off. Indirect rule as a doctrine was largely the work of one man, Frederick Lugard, Governor General of Nigeria. In 1922, he wrote a book about it. The Dual Mandate in British Tropical Africa, roughly 600 pages of carefully argued prose explaining why governing other people's country with their own chiefs is in fact a moral favor to those people. The principle: govern through existing chiefs, preserve traditional institutions, and crucially, do it cheaply. Because that was a real calculation. Nigeria was enormous. London wasn't funding more colonial officers when an indigenous workforce is sitting right there. Governing through familiar faces also minimized resistance and let Britain frame conquest as cultural stewardship, which played beautifully back home. Lugard first ran the system in the north, among the Hausa Fulani Emirates. They had clear hierarchies, established tax systems, recognized courts. It more or less worked. Lugard looked at this and concluded, brilliant, let's do it everywhere. Now, this assumption ran into a problem in Yoruba land. As we have discussed in previous episodes, Yoruba authority didn't flow in clean, clear lines. The Aláàfin was checked by the Oyomesi, and kingdoms competed. Ibadan, the most powerful entity in 19th century Yoruba land, had deliberately rejected kingship authority and ran itself as a military meritocracy. Remember that? It matters in a few minutes. So, the theory claimed to preserve existing institutions. The practice required remaking them. British officials decided which chiefs were legitimate, defined what tradition meant, codified it into law, removed uncooperative chiefs, invented new titles where none conveniently existed. So what did the job of a king actually become? Under indirect rule, the chief's job description was written: collect taxes, not tribute for your kingdom's purpose, but revenue for colonial governments. Recruit labor for colonial infrastructure. Run native courts that answer to British residents at every level. Relay British demands downward, grievances upward selectively. The constraints were absolute: no treaties, no certain tax rates, no appointing subordinates without British signature. One chief, quoted in Atunda's History of the Period, put it with bitter precision. They were called rulers, but ruled nothing. Clerks with traditional titles. And the leash was economic. Pre-colonial chiefs drew wealth from tribute, toll, trade, autonomous, self-generated. Now, they received fixed salaries from colonial government plus a cut of tax revenue. To resist the administration was to lose your salary. That wasn't a side effect of indirect rule. It was its mechanism, which produced a trap with no exit. To keep the position, you needed British approval, which meant imposing taxes and labor demands your people hated. But to actually govern, you need people's legitimacy, which those very impositions eroded. The chiefs who survived weren't the most compliant or the most resistant. They were the most politically skilled. And in case anyone missed the stakes, the British made them public. The Timi of Ede declined to collect unpopular taxes aggressively. The British removed him. A cooperative successor was installed in his place. Every chief in Yoruba land could say it. But the strangest move came with tradition that didn't fit the org charts at all. Because when British couldn't find a king, they built one. Indirect rule needed written, uniform, customary law. But Yoruba custom was flexible, situational. A lie. Different towns, different practices, evolving continuously. But the British solution: write it down, make it uniform, make it binding. Whatever was practiced in 1910 froze into immemorial tradition that later generations were legally bound to maintain. Historians Husband and Ranger have a name for this. That is the invented tradition. The phrase is exact. And the single best example in Yoruba land is Ibadan. Ibadan had rejected sacred kingship by design, by conviction. Authority was earned through military service, not inherited. There was no king of Ibadan. The British found it intolerable. Indirect rule required a traditional ruler. Native courts required a paramount chief. So, in 1936, the colonial administration created one, the Olubadan, the king of Ibadan, wrapped in invented ceremony, furnished with a fabricated ritual history presented as recovery of something ancient. It was entirely new, and within a generation, was treated as immortal. Today, Olubadan is one of the most prominent traditional rulers in Nigeria, and the history of the title's creation is a footnote most Nigerians don't know exists. The Olubadan title was created in the 1930s, and it's now treated as ancient tradition. Does it matter? If an institution is believed to be traditional, function as one, carries traditional authority in people's lives, does the age matter? Drop a comment. To learn more about stories like this, the long form, the bonus episodes, the source notes, join us at patreon.com Zakshitu. In Iseyin, 1916, people refused to pay the tax and clashed with colonial police. Abeokuta, 1918, Egba residents rose against taxes and forced labor, and British troops put it down violently. The revolts were defeated, but they proved that the chiefs could not simply deliver their community's compliance on demand. Market women, marginalized by a system that dealt only with male chiefs, ran boycott and coordinated non-compliance that offered no surface force for British force to strike. The Adadura churches built Yoruba-governed spiritual communities entirely outside colonial sanction. Farmers grew only to subsist, refusing to generate the surplus taxation was designed to capture, what scholar James Scott called the weapons of the weak. And the mission-educated elites, the intermediary class, colonialism had created for itself, became its most articulate critics. Herbert Macaulay turned newspapers, petitions, and legal arguments against the system those tools were built to serve. Indirect was hypocritical. They argued, preserving tradition in name, transforming it in facts. That critique became the intellectual foundation of the independence movement. Which brings us to a house in Lagos on the eve of independence, and the man who proved that the system would outlive its builders. The old man who lives there was once Aláàfin Adeyemi II, son of Adeyemi I, the last independent Aláàfin. He wore the crown for 10 years. Then, in 1955, he was deposed and exiled, not by the British, by Nigerian politicians of the Western Region government, wielding the chieftaincy controls the British had built. A young visitor from Oyo asked for advice. The old king thinks for a long time. The British are leaving, he says, but their systems remain. He is the proof. The first Aláàfin removed by Nigerians was removed with colonial tools. The British built the lever, and they will not take it with them when they go. Did we survive? The visitor asked. Yes, the old man says. And on that, his voice is setting. They survived. They adapted. They kept the name, the throne, the memory of what they were. Whether that form can be filled with new substance, that belongs to the next generation. Indirect rule worked in the sense that a handful of British officials extracted taxes and maintained order across vast Yoruba territories for 6 decades. Because it is extraordinarily difficult to oppose a system that wears the face of your own tradition. But it worked by doing exactly what it claimed not to do. It turned chiefs into colonial servants. It froze living custom into rigid law. It invented tradition to serve administrative needs. 7 episodes, 1 arc. From autonomous, contested Yoruba kingdoms of the 19th century to the colonial administrative unit of the 20th century. From Oyo's collapse to Ibadan's rise. To the identity, the trade, the encounter, and now the hollowing independent Nigeria inherited from both the wound and the possibility. Understanding this is not pessimism. It is the first requirement of building something better. Season 2 picks up exactly here. The colonial period deepens, nationalism sharpens, and a generation raised between two worlds start asking, what to build. That's where we go next. Don't miss season 2. Subscribe or follow now. And the review genuinely helps this work to reach the people it's made for. Keep this show independent at patreon.com/Zakshitu for bonus episodes, source notes, and the community that makes season 2 possible. What landed across season 1? Which question should season 2 follow? I'm reading everyone. Share this season with someone in the diaspora trying to understand where they came from, or someone trying to make sense of contemporary Nigeria without this ground underneath. Follow at Zakshitu everywhere. Full archive and newsletter live on withzakshitu.com. I'm Dr. Zakshitu, and this has been Yoruba History, Identity, and the In-Between. Season 1 is complete. Thank you for building it with me.